Okay, so I got to give my pre-share excuse like I always do. So at the beginning of the week, I found this topic on Chil Hashem and Kiddush Hashem that I wanted to give shir on. And I was preparing it. And then this discussion came up in the community WhatsApp chat about a different topic, about magic shows. So I didn't participate in the discussion because I didn't have the time to do that, and I knew I would get drawn in. And I also didn't want to get participated in a community chat discussion for various reasons. But I had thoughts on it, and so I was thinking, maybe I'll write an article about it. And even though it was on Parshas Kedoshim, and this week is Parshas Emor, I think I can come up with an idea that merges them. So I started writing the article, and I was preparing this year on Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem, and then I realized that I'm not going to be ready in time for the shir on Kiddush Hashem and Chil Hashem, and B, my mind is all occupied in this other topic. So I just threw together a shir really quickly, and I do plan on having a written form of the article, hopefully by early this afternoon. Okay, so without further ado, this might be a little bit shorter of a shir than usual because it was going to be an article. Okay, so this was shared with permission, by the way. So I call it a PSA that was posted in the WhatsApp chat. So the person wrote, as we learn from Parshas Kedoshim and as explained by our rabbis, there is a clear directive against performing magic as it involves illusions and sleight of hand. The Rambam and Sefer HaChinich caution us on the damage that attending magic performances can do to a person, particularly our children who are enchanted by such performances. While it isn't specifically forbidden to attend a magic show, it can lead to serious philosophical mistakes and kares. Okay, so there are three claims being made here, which are the Torah, as explained by the rabbis, prohibits sleight of hand. 2, Rambam and Sefer HaChinich warn us of the harm in such practices, especially for children. And 3, attending magic shows, while not technically prohibited, can lead to philosophical mistakes and kares. Okay, so I don't know, those of you who are in the chat, in the share right now, I don't know what you thought of that. But I actually, when I read it, thought, okay, I agree with all of these claims. What I don't agree with is the conclusion he's drawing from it. Okay, so what I want to do is this shir is going to be in 3 parts. One is I want to go through the claims that he's making with all the sources. Then I want to go through why I disagree with the conclusion and a basis I have for disagreement in in the words of a great chacham. And then I want to try to tie it into Parshas Emor, okay, because that's what the Parsha is. All right, so does anyone know which Torah prohibition he's talking about here? Yeah, Brooke.
There are prohibitions against sorcery. But
Okay.
also while we're on this topic, it reminded me of a bunch of Jews who say that you can't read Harry Potter, which I vehemently disagree with.
Okay, so the interesting thing, so the Harry Potter question is philosophically related to this, but halakhically not related. So I won't address that. But maybe we can work the philosophical part in. Okay, yeah, Ayala.
Just a question on what we're gonna do in this year. What
Yeah.
is the conclusion that you're saying that you're going to disagree with? Or is that for later?
The conclusion is he's saying that you should not take your kids to magic shows. Okay. And in fact, I actually I saved his conclusion for the end, but I'll just read it here. He concluded, imagine a magic show from a child's perspective. Magicians don't start their show by saying this is all fake and I'm tricking you. The kids sit there with docile and mesmerized looking up to them. My point was, this is his conclusion, if you want your children to be Talmidei Chachamim, it is important to note this. There is falsehood inherent in the act of magic and illusions, and if you don't dispel it up front, it's clearly under this prohibition. Also, even if the audience isn't involved in the Isser itself, it's an Isser of Lifnei Iver. But the main part I'm focusing on is if you want your children to be Chachamim, it's important to know this. And basically he was saying you shouldn't take your kids to magic shows. Okay. Or you should be cautious of this when you take your kids to magic shows. Yeah, Esty?
You asked, okay, first I also disagreed with if you want your children to be there. I mean, a lot goes in and there's a lot of other things that go into raising kids, but just focusing on this kind of thing, I also just disagreed is the key, the keys are but right. You asked which prohibition. I was actually wondering, I don't know, does it have to do with weights and measures? Like
interesting
that you can't switch one thing for another?
That's a very interesting theory. To my knowledge, it does not have to do with that, but that's a well,
Okay, I
why,
had no idea.
what's
Just-
your
Yeah, so I was guessing.
okay, sure. Okay, so Brooke is actually it's funny. Brooke is it might be correct that there's a prohibition of kishuf, of sorcery. Okay, halakhically, the address is not kishuf, although it does seem to stray into that category. So the Isser, I didn't realize it was on the screen, is in Vayikra 19:26. Lo soch lo hadam, lo tenachshav, lo te'onenu. Don't eat over the blood. Don't practice nichush, which is omen reading. And then lo te'onenu. So this is the Isser called me'onen. Now, it's very difficult to translate me'onen into one English term because there's a machlokes on what constitutes me'onen, and we paskin according to both. And I don't see any conceptual relationship between the two. So if anyone can venture a conceptual relationship, then be my guest. And if anyone can venture a word that captures it, then I would love it. But I don't know of a way to translate it. Okay, so let's read the Rambam in the Sefer HaMitzvos. Mitzvah losa se lamed beis. So he says the 32nd, actually, I have the English here, but I'm going to go ahead and read it in Hebrew, even though it's... And no, I'll read in English. The Rambam wrote this in Judeo-Arabic, so it's already a translation. Okay, the 32nd commandment is the prohibition against acting according to astrology. Okay, the Hebrew is itstagninus, which is clearly not a Hebrew word. This means refraining from saying, this day is suitable for such and such an action, and intending to carry it out. Or saying, this day is inauspicious, unlucky for a certain action, and refraining from doing it. Okay, now, obviously, this does not mean, it's beautiful outside, let's have a picnic. Okay, it means like in a magical way. Okay, a superstitious way. This is what is meant by the verse, Lo yimate b'cha v'chule me'onen. There should not be found among you they say soothsayer, okay, a me'onen. That's in Devarim 18:10. And this prohibition is repeated in the verse, which we just read, do not practice me'onen. The Sifra, which is the halachic midrash on this verse, states, do not practice me'onen. This refers to those who determine times. Okay, in Hebrew, it's... nosne itim, those who give times. This means it is derived from the word ona. Okay, ona means season or time. That is, there should be no one among you who determines lucky and unlucky times, saying this particular time is good and this particular time is bad. One who transgresses this prohibition is subject to lashes, specifically one who declares the times. One who declares the times, not the one who asks about them. However, asking about them is also forbidden, in addition to being false. One who orients his actions to a specific time, thinking that he will be fortunate or succeed in that work, also receives lashes since he has performed an action. Okay, so that's the first of the two subdivisions of this Isser, is declaring certain times as lucky or unlucky, and acting according to those times. And asking for an astrologer for these times is also forbidden, but you don't get whiplashes for this. Okay, that's the first thing, and that we're not going to talk about. Okay, but the second one is he says included in I am going to read the Hebrew. So included in this is an act of achizas einayim, which I would translate as visual illusions. Literally means grabbing the eyes. Okay. V'lashon chachamim, the sages say in the Gemara Sanhedrin Samech He Amud Beis, me'onin zeh ha'ochez es ha'inayim. Me'onin is one who does an act of achizas einayim, of visual tricks. V'hu sug gadol misugei takbulos. This is a huge category of trickery, including, here's where he defines it, kalus tenuas hayad ad shemedamim la'adam devarim bilti amitiyim, is sleight of hand or swiftness of the hand, which brings people to imagine things that are not real. Okay, now in case you're wondering what that means, he gives a couple examples. Okay, so we have a rabbit out of the hat. They have, for instance, when a person takes a rope and in front of onlookers, he tucks it into his cloak and then produces a snake. Okay, snake out of the jacket, rabbit out of the hat, same thing. And one who throws a ring into the air and produces it from the mouth of a person in front of him. I guess they did a much, we use coins, okay, but they use rings, okay, much more impressive trick. And other types of illusions like this, which are popular among the masses. Then he says, Kol maase me'elu asur. Every act of this nature is forbidden. V'ha'ose oso nikra ochez esainayim. One who does this is called a performer of illusions. V'hu min mimine hakshafin. And this is a type of sorcery. Now, this is what why I say that what Brooke has said is technically true, but this is a separate lo sase. It's not sorcery. It's a separate lo sase. Lefikach sofig malchus, and therefore you get lashes. Because if you did actual sorcery, you would get a death penalty. Okay, but this is lashes. V'im zeh hu gonev das brios, and not only that, you're tricking people, which is also usher. Now, here's where he states what the PSA WhatsApp person said. V'hahefsed hanigram al yedei kach atzum me'od. The harm caused by this is very severe. Lefi shehadvarim hanimnim lachalutin na'asim efshariim be'enei haschalim v'hanashim v'hana'arim. Because things which are completely impossible are rendered possible in the eyes of the ignorant fools, women, and children. V'turgol machshavtam lekabel as hanimnaos v'lachshov shehem efshariim lios. It accustoms their minds to accept impossible things, thinking that they are possible. V'havinzeh, understand that. V'havinzos. Yeah, Brooke?
What's the difference between illusions and actual sorcery?
Yeah, so that's a whole sugya, and I'm not going to get into that in depth, but basically, if something is an act that people do as sorcery, believing it to be sorcery, or if it is, like defined as such, like categorically, then that would be an act of sorcery. But doing one of these just visual tricks is not. And there is a halachic ruling where if you are like doing something in the middle or on the gray area, but I don't want to get into that. That's the technical details. Okay, so this is what the PSA person is referring to here. So in your own words, based on your own impression of the Rambam stating the harm here, what would you say the Rambam is saying is bad about, doing these types of illusions? Yeah, Esty?
That a person starts to, they misunderstand what's possible, what laws of nature.
Exactly, right. So in other words, you get your categories mixed up in terms of what's possible and impossible in nature. And there's a great quote from the Rambam. I'm trying to track it down, and I can't find it. So ChatGPT gave me Mor Nevuchim 173, which is an enormous parak. It might be the longest parak in the Mor Nevuchim. I couldn't find it when I looked. And then the Igeres Teman, the letter to Yemen, which I only have a partial translation of, which I tried to find. I can't find it, but basically the Rambam says that there are three types of propositions. Okay, when you say like, A is B. So there's either there's necessary propositions, impossible propositions, and possible propositions. Okay, so necessary is like 1 + 1 is 2. It must be true, or the earth is round. Impossible would be impossible, and then possible means that in your mind it could be or it could not be. So for example, if I can't see where Tamar is right now, so I could say the statement Tamar is in her apartment or Tamar is in her parents' house. To my mind, it is, it's not in the necessary category and it's not in the impossible category, it's in the possible category. And the whole process of knowledge is what you're doing is you're taking these, when you first start off, everything is in the category of or most things are in the category of the possible, because you don't know whether they must be or can't or are not. If you had perfect knowledge, everything would either be, impossible or necessary, arguably. So what you're doing when you're getting knowledge is you're taking things and you're sorting them into necessary or impossible. And what these illusions do to people who are impressionable is they mess up your tool, your mind, and like cause you to like or make you predisposed to putting things into the category of possible when it's really impossible. Okay, and maybe it would be a good idea, even though I'm pretty sure we all have seen this before, but this would be good for those who are listening and who don't know, just to read the Rambam's general stance on all forms of magic and superstition and why he holds that this is usher. So this is at the end of Hilchos Avodah Zarah v'Chukos HaGoyim, where he lists all of the various forms of occult practices, and he says, Udvarim elu kulam divrei sheker v'kazavhein. All of these things are false and lies. V'hem shehitu behen ovdei avodah zarah hakadmonim legoye ha'aratzos kidei sheyehanu acharehen. And this is what the early ovdei avodah zarah, idolaters, used to lead astray the nations of the earth, so that they would follow after them. Ve'ein roy l'Yisrael she'ein chachamim mechukamim lihimashech b'havalim elu. It's not proper for Israel, for Jews who are great, wise chachamim, to be drawn after this nonsense, and to not even entertain the thought that these things have any sort of benefit. Shneimar, as it says, there's no omens in Jacob and no charms in Israel. V'nemar, or no fortune telling in Israel, divination. V'nemar ki hagoyim ha'ela asher ata yoresh osam el ma'onin vel kosim yishma'u ve'ata lochein nasan lecha Hashem elokecha. For those nations that you were driving out to inherit their land, the ma'onanim, the astrologers, and the kosmim, the diviners, yishmu, they listen to those people. The ata, but you guys, or you, lochein nasan lecha Hashem elokecha. Hashem did not give you, that lot. Anyone who believes these things and things like them, and believes in his heart, thinks in his heart that they are true and matters of chachma, but the Torah just prohibited them, is just a fool and an ignoramus. He's included in those women and children whose minds are not mature. But people who possess chachma and people who are sound of mind, yedu brayos beruros, they know with clear proofs, shekol elu devarim she'asra Torah einon divrei chachma, that all the things the Torah prohibited are not matters of chachma, ela tohu v'hevel, but they are nothingness and vanity. Shenimshechu behen chasirei hadas, that the people who are deficient in their knowledge or their minds are drawn after, v'natshu kol darchei emes biglalan, and they uproot all paths of truth because of them. Amra Torah, because of this, the Torah says, when it warns against these things, you should be whole or perfect with Hashem your God. So I think that second to the last line is what the Rambam's talking about here, is not to shu kol darchei ha'emes, that the paths of truth are uprooted because of these things. So when the Rambam's saying here, if you're a kid and you're raised on thinking that magic is real, then it's not just gonna like make you prone to doing something that's usher, but you're going to mess up your tselem elokim. You're going to mess up your faculty of telling what is true from what is false, and that's going to actually close off paths of truth to you in other areas. Yeah, Brooke?
What about the tooth fairy?
Good question. It's going to be very tempting throughout this year to ask about various things that might fall into this category, and I think what I want to do is wait until the very end, because I think the categories will become clear, and then if you still have questions, we can address them. Okay. So the Sefer HaChinuch quotes much of the Rambam, and then he adds a new point. He says, another very great damage lies in this. So he says same thing as the Rambam, because among the masses and the women and the youths, matters which are impossible to the utmost degree will be taken to be possible. Then he says this beautiful and deadly phrase, V'yi'ariv l'de'osam l'kabel hanimna. It will delight their minds to accept the impossible. V'heyoso efshar mibilti heyoso ha'inyan nes me'es habore. It will delight their minds to accept that the impossible can be manifest without it being a miracle from the Creator. Perhaps as a result of this, or this will be an evil cause, to deny the fundamental principle of God's existence, v'hikaras nafsham, and the cutting off of their souls. V'havin, understand this. Okay, so he's agreeing with Rambam that this messes up their mind. Okay, but in your own words, what is he adding? That there's this other dimension of the harm here. Yeah, Esty?
That they enjoy thinking that there's a different causality other than that which comes from HaKadosh.
Beautifully said. They enjoy thinking that there is a different causality other than something that traces back to God. Okay, and so we do believe that there's such a thing as supernatural stuff, but that's only because of God. And if you do magic in an area that is not connected to miracles and to God, even if it's just sleight of hand, it will open up this category in a person's mind that they delight in, that there is a way to like cheat the system. There are phenomena that are possible without God's will, and that is harmful to the point where it can actually cause kfira, denial of God. Not that a person is going to say, oh, God doesn't exist, but kfira in the sense of lo ye'elecha Elohim achirim el panai, of believing in other gods or other forces, or denying ein o milvado, believing that there's like this other system of reality outside of God. And and that could lead to cars. In fact, I'll do my my traditional Friday book commercial. So this is, I think I have to unblur the screen to see it. This book was recommended to me by either Yehuda Rappaport or Rabbi Maruf, The Religion of Israel from Its Beginnings to the Babylonian Exile. I have not read the whole thing, but I've read parts of it. And what the argument he makes here basically is that pagan religion is not just a belief in other gods. It's a belief that there's this realm of the magical, and that the gods themselves are subject to those forces. And the reason why magicians are so prominent is magicians are not just beholden to the gods, but magicians interact with and manipulate the world of forces which affect the gods themselves. So it's like it is, in a certain sense, underlying, the realm of actual like polytheism. And this is why in the Kuntras, which I don't remember if I've given over on recording, Rambam he talks about how it's avodah zarah v'chukos hagoyim, the laws of avodah zarah and the statutes of the non-Jews. There are 12 chapters here. 10 of them deal with avodah zarah, and the last 2 deal with chukos hagoyim, with the statutes of the non-Jews, which is these like occult practices. So, excuse me. So the person, the author of the Shir says, why does the Rambam title this chukos hagoyim when most of it is avodah zarah? And he makes this argument. He uses this analogy that avodah zarah is like a tree that can only grow in a certain type of soil. And what is that soil? The soil is the life of irrationality. And the life of irrationality is fertilized by these practices and these beliefs in mystical, magical things, which is what the Torah is targeting with all these prohibitions against occult practices. So in other words, actual denial of God or belief in powers other than God must take root in a certain worldview of irrationality and in alternate causality. And that worldview is promoted by these practices that the Torah proscribes. Okay, so thus far, one more set of points. Yeah, Essie?
Sorry, that makes sense, right? They're not just positing that. That's just, it has to be that way, right? If you're going to believe in a causality that doesn't have to do with God, then
what?
Then I just actually threw a bunch of into my sentence. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm saying that this is the Rambam. This is the Rambam, and this is a Magid Shir's take on the Rambam. But and I believe it, but I'm not saying everyone is going to agree with this. I mean, there are people who believe that magic is real, like the Ramban, and Rashi, and so I wouldn't be so quick to say that believing, and I know that's not what you're saying, but like, to say that like belief in astrology means that you're being prone to denying God. Well, even some of our greatest rationalists, like the Ibn Ezra and the Rambam, held by astrology, and yeah, they didn't hold that it was a causality outside of God. I'm just localizing my claim to not expose myself to charges that I'm not, being faithfully in presenting these sources. Yeah. Okay, so we didn't address practical halakha. So the Shulchan Aruch Yore Kuf Ayin Tes Siman Tes Vav says, Oches es hainayim aser. Grabbing the eyes, which again is performing visual illusions, is aser. Okay. He also says if you do it through the Sefer Yetzirah, it's mutter. Okay, which is a book that people believe to have Kabbalistic powers. We're not going to touch that. Okay, talk to Rav Yosef Karo, who believed in such things. The Shach on this quotes the Rambam. He says, Ayin ber hetev, not ber hetev, Ayin Bach. This is a typo. Not typo. In the Bach, it is written in the name of the Rambam, Degam achisis einayim she'eno aide kishuf, rak aide mare v'takbula v'aide kalus hatunu biyad aser. That even sleight of hand, which is not performed through sorcery, but through illusions and tricks by dexterity of the hand, is forbidden. Okay, so that's the Shach, who we follow in many cases. And then the Ptchei Tshuva says Ayin b'sefer Chachmas Adam klal ayin hey. Look in Chachmas Adam, which is a halacha book, one of the Achronim, in section 75. She hisraim al habadchanim. He criticizes the jesters or the entertainers. Osi machizas einaim, who perform sleight of hand al hachasnus at weddings. V'nikraim taschenspielers. Okay, because it's a German term. Shehim ovrim belav d'oraisa. They transgress a Torah prohibition. V'hametzave lasosam, and someone who commands them to perform over b'lifnei iver is also violating lifnei iver. So lifnei iver is placing a stumbling block before the blind, which is giving someone misleading advice or facilitating someone doing an avera. So I think he's saying if you hire an entertainer to do sleight of hand, since sleight of hand is usher, if you hire them, then you are violating lifnei iver. And then he says, gam usher lihistakel, it's also usher to watch a performer. Ach im haose hu ovid kochavim mutar liros. But if the performer is a non-Jew, then it is permissible to watch. Now, side point. Okay, again, I'm going to make an argument that this is not prohibited. Okay, but if you have the premise that a sleight of hand performer is prohibited, sleight of hand is prohibited, and if you have the premise that hiring them is lifnei iver, and watching them is usher, what argument can you make that watching them is only usher if it is a Jew, but not if it's a non-Jew? Yeah, Tamar?
I have a question, but you can, if you want to continue with that.
Yeah, Esty?
You could say that you shouldn't be watching somebody be over an avera of doing something that's usher, but you could watch somebody who's not Jewish doing it.
Okay, right, exactly, right. So in other words, lifnei iver is you're facilitating someone doing something that's usher. So if it is a Jew, then lo te'onenu is usher, but a non-Jew, presumably it's not usher for them to do ma'onen, so you facilitating them doing that would not be usher from lifnei iver. Okay, Tamar, you had a question.
Yeah, can you say again? I think you said this, but I missed it. Who's Ptchei, Teshuva, and Chachmas Adam?
Yeah, so I actually don't know their names, which is a little embarrassing. Chachmat Adam is, I did know his name. Rav Avram Danzig is 1748 to 1820, who was a major posek, and then I don't know who the Ptchei Teshuva is. Ptchei Teshuva is, I think this is the Ptchei Teshuva, Abraham Hirsch Eisenstadt, 1812 to 1868. These are just common, yeah, this is him, common achronim on the Shulchan Arach. Anyway, who we passing by? Okay, so going back to the claims made in the PSA, claim number 1, the Torah, as explained by the rabbis, prohibits a sleight of hand. Check. Okay, we definitely see that. 2, and we pass in that way. 2, Rambam and Sefer HaChinוך warn us of the harm in such practices, especially for children. We've seen that. Rambam holds it messes up your mind and uproots the paths of truth. And Sefer HaChinוך says it could even, and then 3, attending magic shows, while not technically prohibited, okay, like, according to the Ptchei Teshuva, if it's a non-Jew, you could attend it, can lead to philosophical mistakes and kares, as the Sefer HaChinוך said. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said I agree with the claims. The claims I think are all true. Okay, so the question is, can you think of an argument, just based on your intuition, for saying that that either that attending magic shows is not prohibited or harmful, or even that doing sleight of hand is not prohibited or harmful? And by the way, in the community chat, the person who was making this argument was saying it's clearly prohibited. And thankfully, someone tagged, our local rabbi who got smicha from the yeshiva, who is a professional magician. Okay, so I don't think that he is doing something that is clearly prohibited. So clearly there is an argument to be made, and I'm asking, can you come up with an argument? Yeah, Esty.
I think considering that this is all prohibited so as not to confuse someone about how, the laws of nature, if it could be done in a way where it would even maybe promote an understanding. First of all, it needs to be clear, but if you understand that people can confuse you and, you need to think about things and there could be causality that you don't see that can, that can cause things to appear certain ways, I think that could even be helpful.
Okay, good. I agree with you. That is going to be my conclusion as well. Yeah, Tamar?
I was gonna say similarly, and I think there's also the additional point of there's a modern conventional understanding. Everybody knows that there are magic tricks.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So these are the two angles I wanted to take. Okay, so let me ask you a question on what Tamar is saying. Okay, just a question for everyone here, which is what do you think? Okay, I'll posit something here. Okay, and I know that there's going to be a lot of gray area, but I don't think that anyone, with the possible exception of maybe like little kids, I don't think anyone sees a magician saw a woman in half and put her back together and then says, this is a necromancer. Okay. So the question is like, what, and I do think that in the ancient world, then the Rambam's, and I know Rambam wasn't in the ancient world, but certainly in the ancient world, I think that there was a status quo assumption of magic being real. Okay, that you see someone do something that is a supernatural and you assume it's real. My question for you is what changed? And I don't think it's just one thing, but what has changed between the world that the Torah was addressing and the world that we're in now? Yeah, Tamar?
I don't know if this is like literally like if the Enlightenment is the right thing to point to, but I think there's like general scientific culture.
Okay, good. So I was actually gonna say those as two separate things. Yeah, I'll call on Ayala first, then I'll state my view. Yeah, Ayala.
Also, more widespread education.
Okay, more widespread education.
I don't know if that's factually true, but I think.
Yeah, I do think that that's true. Okay, so I was gonna say I think that there are three major factors. And you can argue about the number. Okay, but the Enlightenment, which is when people, a worldwide shift in perspective, when people started applying reason to everything. Okay, and things, especially things that were considered to be off limits to reason or mystical or religious. Then I'll call it the scientific revolution and the scientific era, which in my mind is separate from the Enlightenment. Obviously started kick things off, but now we're in an era where like everyone is aware of science, and constantly, even though there are people who believe crazy things, there is this awareness that like more and more things that people thought were mysterious and magical are being shown to be false or operate based on scientific principles. Okay, but the third thing, which I don't think people are necessarily aware of, is a change in how magic is performed. Okay, so a little bit of background. Okay, which I will accompany with some cute pictures. So people know that I'm into Magic the Gathering, but a lot of people don't know that my major hobby from the ages of 4 to 14 was magic, was stage magic. Okay, so for example, here is me with my grandfather when he's teaching me magic. Okay, and he was an amateur magician, and he was part of I forgot the name of the club, but it was the Magic Society of Honolulu. Okay, and I think the head magician was Jimmy Zukimura, who is the late husband of our good friend Carol Zukimura. I used to put on magic shows with him in school and at various events in Hawaii. The famous story was at Johnny's second birthday party, which he could not attend because he got chickenpox, but it was this major event. I think it was that event that I performed. We were performing, and then my grandfather Gung made a mistake, and I was 6 years old. I said, Gung, you did it the wrong way, and everyone laughed because they thought that was the cutest thing. And then I also used to spend a lot of time inventing tricks, and those who know me can probably picture sitting there for hours and hours and hours practicing magic tricks and inventing tricks. So I read up a lot about magic and magic's history and the biographies of magicians. So this was a childhood obsession of mine. Okay, so I don't know what without this whole introduction, I don't know what the average person would say about like magic as an art form. But if I asked you, and again, you're already thinking a certain way, when did magic become like a form of entertainment? Like a widespread entertainment, what would you say? What would you guess?
Sports.
Say again?
Like the courts, like gesture type things or something
Okay,
like that?
so there definitely were individual tricks like that jesters did, or like at fairs and stuff. I'm asking like the concept. See, maybe it's even maybe it's something that is just so rooted in our society that you can't even like identify it. A magician. We talk about magicians. Binyamin Cohen is a magician. When did magicians become a thing? Tricks were always around, right?
Good question.
Yeah, okay, right. So I remember, I was looking into this again today, but I remember this from a kid. It was Jean-Eugene Robert Houdin. Okay, and I remember that name because guess who named himself after this guy? Houdini. Okay, so Houdini's real name is Eric Weiss. Okay, and Houdini is probably the most famous American magician, but he named himself after Houdin. So I'm just reading Wikipedia's intro here. 1805 to 1871. He was a French watchmaker, magician, and illusionist, widely recognized as the father of the modern style of conjuring. He transformed magic from a pastime for the lower classes seen at fairs to an entertainment for the wealthy, which he offered in a theater opened in Paris, a legacy preserved by the tradition of modern magicians performing in tales. Okay, now, so he really started like as an art form for entertainment that people like go to and pay money to see, not just something that like the jester does in the court or like you see in a carnival. Yeah, Esty?
I just think it's interesting that was entertainment for the masses,
Yeah,
not
it's true.
it didn't come from the more refined sensibilities and going like
Exactly.
down.
And you could also imagine that might have limited its growth potential for like as an art form, like it was just done by on the street. Now, so he started this off, and magicians started becoming it started becoming a like a craft, and like like that you would apprentice for, and I would almost describe it as a guild. Okay, and magicians were in a very almost more so than other guild members from other crafts, kept the secrets of the trade secret, because the more people know about these things, then it can it can like ruin the whole profession, right? Because the whole idea is you want to perform these things, but you don't want people to know how it's done. Okay, and the last stage here, which you can make an argument about how much cultural impact this had, but this has a special place in my mind because I lived through this. Okay, well I just gave it away. Okay, when did magic secrets start to be spoiled? Anyone know the name of the person who did it? We might have talked about this in the past, in past class. So I didn't know his first name, but he was known as the masked magician, Val Valentino. Okay, in 1997 through 1999, he did TV specials called Breaking the Magician's Code, Magic's Biggest Secrets Finally Revealed. And he basically just went on TV in a mask and just exposed how a bunch of classic tricks were done. Okay, and as you can imagine, magicians got very, very mad at him. Okay, and I remember reading that he got death threats, which is not unbelievable, but apparently he got lawsuits. People tried to sue him. So again, I don't know the full history about like what this did, but I know that this was sent waves throughout the magic industry. And then people started exposing tricks. And then you had another wave of this now where, and this is something I think magicians are very upset about, is YouTube and the internet, and now you can just look up how any trick is done, So my point is that there was an evolution here in terms of the awareness of magic as a form of trickery and illusions among the masses, and also the availability of figuring out how things are done. Okay, so my contention is that as a result of all these things, of the Enlightenment, and which led to the scientific revolution and to the information age, and magic changing from something where like we know that there are stage magicians now, I think the default has shifted from seeing sleight of hand in the context of a wizard or a sorcerer or an occultist and assuming that it's real. It's changed from that to we know that magic is an art and that there are tricks. Okay, now does this mean that every single person is going to know that this is the case? No, obviously there are people who still believe that magic is real, and there are also still charlatans who pass off their magic as genuine. Okay, but I think there has been a general shift in the status quo. Okay, but the problem is like this: is I think this is a good argument. The question is there support for this in the sources? Okay, so I have not looked into this topic halakhically until now, but I've always assumed that this is what the Rambam meant. Okay, and I'll show you in the Rambam. The line here is when he defines the type of sleight of hand that he's talking about. Kalus tenuas hayad ad shemedamim la'adam dvarim bilti amitim. Sleight of hand which brings people to imagine things that are not real. And in that context, the harm that he mentions has a qualification here, which is that if you're doing sleight of hand in a way that makes magic seem not real, seem real, then that's usher. But if you're doing it in a way which makes magic, which is like, not going to lead people to think that things are impossible, then quickness of hand is not intrinsically prohibited. Okay, like there are people, I don't know if you've seen YouTube videos or whatever of street food chefs who like make their street food like very, very fast, that's not usher, Or one thing that in the community chat, I was actually going to make this point. This is the first point I was going to make when I before I decided to not participate in the chat, but then Yosef Soloveitchik made this point. Is it usher to show a kid a Marvel movie that has special effects because he's going to think it's real? Like there are many things we can do now, not just like in real life, but you can have special effects and people will think that things are real when they're really not, or like Brooke was saying, like Harry Potter, so like you can't just, this is an interesting isser because it is an act, but it is an act of a certain character, and the character is an act that is done to make people think that what you're doing is real magic and not just something natural. Okay, so this is what I thought about the Rambam, but I did not have a halachic source for the fact that this is how we actually poskin. And I assume that this is how we poskin because, again, Ben Cohen is a magician, and he does that for a living. But then in the chat, Ayala Cohen, who's Ben's wife, posted the source sheet, which had a tshuva from Rav Moshe on it. Okay, and the source sheet had its own what claimed to be seemed to be a translation of Rav Moshe, but I went and I looked it up myself, and I don't like the translation so much. So there's this tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe Yore Chelik Dalad Siman Yud Gimel. So the whole first part, and the topic is Be'inyan Achizas Einayim Hanasis Aide Kalus Hatanua, is visual illusions that are done through dexterity of the hand. So he goes through a very long analysis of the sources, which we don't have time for now. Okay, but then he concludes with he concludes by differentiating between theory and psak. And I'm just going to say this as my own disclaimer, and Rav Moshe is going to say a similar disclaimer here. I am not a posek. Okay, so don't take this as psak halacha. But Rav Moshe is a posek. He's going to say he's not giving this as psak, and it's going to make you smirk when you see him actually get to the psak part. But let's just read it here. Okay, so he says like this, and I'm going to read it in Hebrew and in my English translation here. Okay. V'zehu masha amarti b'zeh b'derech halimud. This is what, everything up until now is what I said by way of learning, okay, which I'm understanding to mean theoretical analysis. But this matter has not come from me by way of psak, of a practical halacha. For that there is no prohibition in sleight of hand through dexterity and similar methods. Okay, for in any case, if the performer deceives others and claims to do things supernaturally, it must be forbidden. Because he can mislead people into believing that he's a miracle worker. Okay, and say what I know he's not talking about the Kabbalist charlatans who do forms of magic and claim that they're miracle workers, but there are people like this who take people's money, who are ostensibly frum Jews, who are using actual tricks and convincing people that they're miracle workers. Okay, evil people. A person like this, it's definitely usher to learn from. Even if he didn't lie, and all the more so when he lies. Okay, I don't know why he's talking about learning from such a person. Okay, but then he says like this: even if he does not lie, and says that this is a natural thing. Okay, meaning not supernatural. That God gave him, saying that God gave him a manual dexterity that's superior to other people. rak ba'ofen sheyiru v'yakiru dehi mitanua umihirus biyoser. So he should not show it off before people unless it is evident and recognized as rapid movement. V'lo ba'oseh ba'ofen shelo yiru v'lo yakiru ela adra v'yomru mizeh she'eno inyan TV ela inyan kshafim. He should not do it in a manner which they don't see and recognize, but to the contrary, they will say from this that it is not natural but sorcery. So in other words, if he has this ability of manual dexterity, then he, and he does it in front of people, he should tell them, or he should make it manifest that this is just, dexterity and it's natural. He should not let them see and think that this is miraculous and sorcery. Okay. Umimela she'asur af shelo yishmu lo inshi, and it's asur even if people will not listen to him. V'af sheleka isur misa mishum she'ena mesis le'isur avodah zara, even though there's no death penalty of a mesis, of someone who leads someone astray to avodah zara. Sorry, I skipped a line. Shebezehu mesis l'kshafim. Because if he does this, if he leads people astray to think that he is doing real magic, that is a mesis. It's someone who leads people astray for avodah zara, but it's for kshafim. It's for sorcery. And people, and it's asur even if people don't actually heed him and like get drawn into belief in sorcery. The afshaleka isur misa, even though there's no death penalty for this, mishum she'eno mesis isur avodah zara, because he's not being a mesis for actual avodah zara, which is liable for the death penalty. About isur mesis ika l'chol isur, there still is a mesis prohibition for any isur. Kaha denachash hakadmoni shelo haya al isur avodah zara ela al isur lav umisa b'dei shemaim. Okay, I actually forgot to look this part up, so I don't know what he's referring to. Okay, now if all this seems unclear, it's going to get clear in a second. Okay, by the way, Rav Moshe has a type of Hebrew that is a little bit informal. Okay, that's why it's reading like a run-on sentence, because it is. Aval shayach rak ladun lahatir labadchanim. However, it is relevant to consider permitting the entertainers she'osin inyani achizas enaim al chasunos, who perform sleight of hand tricks at weddings, be'ofen shehi yedua u'mefursam shu mitzad kalus hatanua v'chadome, in a manner that is well known and publicized that it is due to dexterity and the like. Shehu maise tivi, which is a natural act, v'lo shayach l'kshafim, and is not related to sorcery. V'chachmas adam, the chachmas adam in klal 89 סימן 6, mashma seems to imply she'oser gam be'ofen zeh, shehu mishum svar sabach, who seems to prohibit this matter due to the reasoning of the Bach. You could look earlier in Moshe when he goes through all these sources. And it seems like the Shach agrees. Even though it is contradicted. Okay, fine. This is all in the sources he went through earlier. Okay, but now he gets to what I think is the key line. V'zeh hayashayach leser lehabadchanim rak im yomru she'osim zeh be'ezeh lachashim. It is only this prohibition would only apply to entertainers if they claim to perform with some incantations. Af shehim lachashim she'enam aydeh kishav, even though they are not incantations that are sorcery. Tehu achizas einayim k'tshuvas harama, which would be the type of visual trickery prohibited by the Rama. If they say that this is done in a natural manner, now you can dispute me on how to translate this. I say that if they claim to do it naturally, and indeed it is well known and publicized as such, okay. I don't see any prohibition in this. Okay, so you could read Rav Moshe to be saying that if they say that this is natural and they publicize it, then it's not usher. Or the way I think you should read this is if they say that this is natural, and it is in fact known and publicized, meaning I don't even think they need to say it. Okay, then I don't see any isser in this. Okay, now watch Rav Moshe, not Poskin. Okay. Aval al kol panim lahora lemaisa lo ba liadi inyan zeh v'lo shamati shebekan osim badchanus bechlal. Nevertheless, this matter has never come to me as a question of practical halacha, nor have I heard such a form of entertainment being done here at all. Uvemiktzas makomos sheniz damin, in certain places that I've attended, al chasnos, in certain weddings I've attended, shayasham badchan, there was an entertainer. V'lo nis asku b'dvarim ka'elu. They did not engage in such acts. Therefore, lo nishma mimeni zeh ela b'limud v'lo l'maaseh. Therefore, this is only a theoretical question and not a practical ruling. Okay, meaning, like you should not understand. You should not listen to. You should only listen to me this in terms of learning and not in terms of action. Af shlo mistapakna b'halacha. Even though I have no doubt that this is the halacha. Okay, v'im haya ba l'maaseh. And if this came to a halacha l'maaseh question, haya mishtamatna, I would avoid paskening mipnei kavod rabbeinu ha'osrim, due to the honor of our rabbis who prohibit. V'im lo haya efshar lehishtamit, and if I could not escape paskening, hayisi more de b'derech tivi v'yadua mefursam shu derech tivi shemutar. If evasion were impossible, I would rule that if it is done naturally and known and publicized as natural, it's permitted. So he's saying like this, just to summarize. He's saying, theoretically, the halacha is definitely that if it is publicized and known that this is a natural thing and not real magic, it's definitely mutter. But I've never seen this, and no one has asked me a halacha question, and therefore I am not paskening. And if someone did ask me to pasken, I would try to avoid it. And I would, in deference to those who say it's usher, but if someone were to ask me what the psak should be, I say that it is totally mutter. Okay. And then he throws in something to address the WhatsApp guy. Okay. He says, Uma shehosif kavod toras rabbeinu hakedoshim, or whatever the honorific is, regarding what your honor, meaning that's how he talks to people who ask him the questions. Regarding what you said, that it is known that many children are amazed by this, okay, by magic. That to the point where the kids believe that this guy must have supernatural powers. So in other words, this guy said, kids are amazed by magicians and they think the magician has powers. You're exaggerating things. Okay. Kids agree, you think that this person is great. And kids think that there are many guys like this. There's nothing to be worried about. Okay, so in other words, he's saying that kids are not going to believe that this guy has great powers, but only that this is like a very talented guy and that there are many like magicians like this. Okay, so what do we get from Rav Moshe? So what I get is, again, I'm not poskening and he's not poskening, okay, but vindication for the reasoning that we have, which is that in this day and age, it is known that magicians are using tricks, okay? And certainly if he says it outright, but I am saying even if he doesn't say it outright, it is known that magicians use tricks and they're not doing real magic, and they're not claiming to do real magic. And therefore, it is not anywhere at all usher in terms of the type of achizas einaim that is usher. The achizas einaim that is usher is when you're doing it and giving people the impression that you're doing real magic. And regarding the harm to the kids are not harmed by this because they are not actually believing this. And this is where I'm going to make a point like what Esti said, which is as follows. I happen to think that if you were to prevent your child in this day and age from seeing magicians, it's only going to make things worse. Because what you're going to do is you're going to create a forbidden fruit type of scenario, okay, where you're creating a certain mystique and aura around magicians. And you're tinging it with, this is a avodah zarah, this is bad, So you're going to create a lot of conflicting emotions around there, okay, but also a certain mystique. But the real harm you're doing is you're missing up on a valid educational opportunity to show them, look at this guy doing this trick, and now we're going to go watch on YouTube how it's done. And what you have to do is you have to make it normal so that when kids see this, they're already looking for how this is done. Now, again, I grew up as a magician, and I would see kids my age see a magician and be astonished while I'm trying to think, okay, how did he do it? You want the kid to be thinking how the magician did it. And the only way to do that is to expose them to this and to get them to not see this as a real magic thing. And sometimes you'll see on shows like America's Got Talent, where you have a magician who does something and then the audience is like amazed and you see people's facial expressions like they think that this is real. I can only assume that it's because they weren't exposed. They're not in a rational culture and they're not exposed to magicians doing this magic stuff. So I think that what we should do is embrace the cultural tide of rationality and scientific thinking and like the demystification of the world, and like train our kids in this and get them to realize like these guys are not charlatans. These guys are illusionists, you know, and illusionist is a type of skilled thing. And like, it's no different than pickpocketing, you know, pickpockets steal stuff without you looking at it, but they're not claiming it's magic. Yeah, Esty?
Well, first of all, just in terms of Moshe saying the person has to say by advertising themselves as a magician or an illusionist or anything like that, everybody knows,
right?
Like to begin with, without them saying explicitly that they are doing illusions,
right?
And secondly, even the people who are like, don't know how it's done and are, I think everybody's like, wow, how did he do that?
Exactly.
I mean,
that's a great point.
Like I can't even imagine anybody. I mean, there are going to be people who really think that they did something, but those people, I think most people think that person has a problem. That's not normal.
Exactly. Yeah. I that's a great way to say it. The fact that that's the gut reaction of how did he do that means that they know that there was something that was done secretly, which is what the Rambam.
That's it.
Yeah. Right. Right. And by the way, I always forget which word it is. If it's the lahatehem, I think lahat is the word that the Chumash uses that the Rambam and Abraham and Rambam say means like secret arts, like meaning that it's the word that the Torah uses for magic is like trickery, Yeah, Brooke?
Just to kind of add on to Eshti's point, another thing that people do is they ask the magician to do it again.
Right, exactly.
Figure out what happened. And that's like a normal thing, is like, even when I was a kid, I remember I'd watch magic shows and we'd all be like, do it again.
Right, exactly. And what does the magician always say when you ask him to do it again?
They refuse. They refuse
because they know, that it's gonna lead to someone figuring out how it's done. Whereas if it was real magic, he should do it again, or he should say, I depleted my powers, There is one, however, there's one category of magic, of stage magic that is practiced now, which I do think falls into this category, which is there are certain mentalists who make it seem like they have psychic powers, okay? And even there, it's not clear that would be magic. Like, I don't think believing in ESP is the same thing as believing in Avodah Zarah and magic. People could just think it's like a power of the mind, but there are certain mentalists, and in fact, I think it's interesting. I think the way mentalists do it now is they do lead people to think that they have a talent that they can read people's minds, not a magic that reads people's minds. But I do think there is a very narrow category of like, if you are doing magic in a way where you are reading people's minds, you're not doing anything with your hands, you're reading people's minds, and you're doing it in a context that lends like a sort of mystical occult air to it, that might be usher for this reason. Yeah, Esty?
There was one point that you made earlier that I think is worth noting, and I don't know whether that makes anything usher or not, but it's something to, I think, be aware of. I do think that there is a certain pleasure that comes with not knowing how these things work, and like, ooh, like even though everybody knows that it's a trick, and maybe the magician can't repeat it because he can't reset up his machinery, whatever it was that he used, but like, I think there's a certain pleasure in feeling or thinking that maybe it was something that breaks out of the laws of nature. And I think there is a certain enjoyment that people have of like just rebelling against God, just throw off the whole thing. None of this is real, but I just think it's something to be aware of. I don't think that a magic show is going to tilt one way or the other, but I think it's just something. I think so. I do. Not encouraging kids also, because I think that is something people. I have a certain friend who loves fairy tales and loves that, and she loves for her kids to feel that there's like a certain magic in the world.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I do agree that So the way I would respond to that is saying that this is part of the psyche and it's pleasurable and it appeals to fantasy. But halakha draws a line, and even like, there is like anything in halakha, there's a lifnim mishur zadin, there's going beyond the letter of the law. And a parent should be sensitive to that when parenting their kid, and also with the specific kid. Like there are kids who are just very into believing in impossible things and fairy tales. With a kid like that, you might want to be machmir. Before I call on you, Brooke, I just want to share this one thing also, and I'm not going to name the name because I don't know how they feel about it, but there was a family in our yeshiva that when they raised their kids, they were aware of this tendency in kids to like want to believe in things, but they also were aware that it's not against halacha to just like, listen to a fairy tale. Okay. So what they did was they created something that they called, their kids were young, called the Magic Busters Club, which is whenever their kid wanted to see something that involved magic, like let's say Harry Potter was popular and they wanted to read Harry Potter, or they wanted to read, to watch one of the movies, then they would tell their parents that they wanted to see it. And then their parents would give them a monetary payment to not watch it. So it's like, it's still within the realm of the kid's choice. They didn't like outlaw it, but they like, they gave the kid, they conveyed the message that this is not desirable, and like they gave them an incentive to not be involved in that. Okay, so you could hear that practice and say like, it sounds good on paper, but then I asked the kids when they grew up, I said like, did it work? And they said, yeah, we got a lot of money, and like we basically found ways to like watch the other stuff anyway, So like when you're in the realm of Mishlei Din, going beyond the letter of the law, then like it's much harder than a black and white halakha. I'm gonna call an Esty first, and I'll go to tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add, having raised 4 kids and having dealt with, these things, my reaction to the chat was like, you can raise a Talmud Chacham by, it's just not that simple, and you really have to take into account so many different factors for your kids and what their friends are doing and all different kinds of things. That the most important thing is that it's not a big deal, it's not real,
right?
And it's a trick.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I
right.
think if you're all worked up and trying to keep your kids away from it, like you could make a different problem. It's
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, what it reminds me of is my best friend growing up was evangelical Christian, and his mom, whenever there was anything that remotely was connected to Satan, his mom prohibited it. So like certainly watching or reading anything that was occult was out of the question. We were playing Magic the Gathering, and so his mom forbade him to play, and then got him this Christian card game called Redemption, where you have to save souls for Jesus, and then even like I remember one time we were playing poker, and one of us got 3 6s, and he said, I have to stop playing. It ends up being this like neurotic thing where like you're making it into a power of some sort that has chashivus, that has like some sort of prominence, when really like it's like, what we should have the attitude towards is like in Tehillim, hold on, in Tehillim 116, 115, the idols are silver and gold, the handiwork of man. They have a mouth, but they cannot speak. They have eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but cannot hear. They have a nose, but cannot smell. Their hands, they cannot feel. Their feet, they cannot walk. They cannot utter a sound from their throat. Those who make them should be like them, whoever trusts in them. It's like the Torah didn't take the approach of saying, fear the other gods. They're harmful. It's these idols are nothing. Like it's just nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Tamar.
So I think that my mom and you addressed most of the things that I was going to say, but I think this is a good, like it is good to be aware of what the sort of possible harmful psychological appeals are of magic, depending on the person, how they're relating to it.
Yeah.
And then you have to know yourself and know your kids, and then you have to work with it. Just like anything else in the world, like maybe certain novels are appealing to things that aren't the highest elements of your nature, but maybe you want to read it anyway. It's sort of like anything else where you have to sort of
exactly.
And I really
what is that? It's definitely more nuanced.
More nuanced.
Just
And I do think it's really interesting. Also, a good point that your attitude that your kids should see in you is like, well, this is real, so it's not a big deal.
Exactly. Yep. Brooke, what were you gonna say or ask?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was just, like, yeah, sure, you can read Harry Potter, you can watch these magicians, and it was so obvious that it was fake that it didn't really faze me. I think when parents try to keep the kid away from it, it gives it an air of legitimacy, because why would you try to keep me away if it's so obviously fake?
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. Again, that's what I mean by like the forbidden fruit of like you're creating an appeal, and there's a certain rebelliousness that, in some people might be like in the YBT family I mentioned, that the kids are going to go find other ways to watch it. But in other cases, it could be an internal ideological rebelliousness of, oh, you think this is so harmful and bad, I'm going to believe in it. I think it could go that way also. I also want to mention regarding Tamara's point and Essie's point that, this same emotion could come up in other areas that are not touched by halakha. So for example, I think one of the areas, as a kid, I also like read and watched fairy tales and stuff and movies, and I did not have any sort of belief in those things. But the area that as a young kid did stir this in me was I loved horror movies and horror books, and certain areas of horror, I think because it touches a primal feeling of fear, and fear attaches to things that are, real. I think part of me as a little kid was inclined to believe certain occult phenomena in the context of horror, But again, I don't know if any, any posik who's going to say that, reading a Stephen King book is a derisa, But I'm just saying, in the same way as you have to be nuanced in knowing your kid and knowing how to, govern these things, you also have to be aware of what taps into these feelings in other ways that are not really addressed by halakha. Okay, so yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing. I just think it's really important. Like, everybody wants their kids to grow up to be a Talmid Chacham,
Yeah.
But like, the best way to do that is to help your kid grow up to be a person who is just normal, and
Right.
normal meaning like able to live in reality. And I was just discussing this, I think, with Eliza. We were talking about whether like you encourage kids to go to minyan or you don't encourage kids to go to minyan, things like that. And like, it depends on your kid. And you if you have a drive for your kids to be Talmid Chacham, that's already a problem.
Right. That's true. That's a good point.
For them, and because it's good for them and it's the best life.
Right.
And the whole conversation to begin with of like, no, because then you're going to get this, good for you, kid, is already like, oh my God, I just don't do that to your
Yep. Very good point. Yeah. Just really, so last 2 points. First of all, I just want to address Brooke's question about Harry Potter and the Tooth Fairy. I think we have addressed it already, which is that I think that anything that is going to promote belief in thinking that impossible things are possible is harmful, but you have to know your kid, and you have to exercise common sense reasoning. Yeah, I don't think it's good to promote belief in the Tooth Fairy, because why would you do that? Like, why would you, I always used to say, and I'm surprised more Christians don't make this point. Why do Christian parents teach their kids that Santa Claus is real? You're training your kid to believe that there's an invisible being who's always watching you, who knows when you're good and knows when you're bad, and then rewards you for good and then punishes you for bad. And then you say, psych, not real, but the one that we worship in church is real. You're just setting your kid up for failure, So it's just, you're messing with those categories in the mind. So I don't think you should introduce your kid to things that you get them to believe in. But again, I don't think the average kid reads, again, I can't speak to the average kid. I did not read Harry Potter and think that magic is real. Okay, so and I think that that we we put this in the fiction section. I don't know. Again, I'm not gonna make the points that we've already made. Okay, last point though is, what does this have to do with Parshas Emor? And again, there's not a real connection to Parshas Emor, but I want to connect it to the Parsha. So can anyone think what this whole lesson has to do with Parshas Emor? Not like there's one answer, but okay. So maybe you haven't looked at the parsha yet. Okay, but what is what topic is dealt with primarily in the first couple prakim of the parak, or who are the mitzvahs in the first couple prakim directed at? Kohanim. Okay. So maybe the reason why you're not thinking about the connection between this and Kohanim is because of the Torah's success. Okay, so let me read to you an excerpt from the Koran Tanakh of the Land of Israel in the Exodus volume on Shemos 7:11. This is by Dr. Racheli Shalomi Chain. She writes, since magic was part and parcel of religion and science in ancient Egypt, the chief lector priest, and I had to look at what lector is. Lector are the priests who recite certain formula or incantations. The chief lector priests were known for their magical skills. In ancient Egyptian literature, lector priests attended their king. They were called to the palace whenever the king needed their help. In literature of legendary nature, they always managed to overcome problems using impressive magic or a series of magical deeds. The exclusive skills and knowledge of lector priests were highly valued in ancient Egyptian society. From ancient Egyptian tomb inscriptions, we know that their immersion in the realm of magic and literacy was believed to give them the power to cast fatal curses. The combination of their knowledge and their magical skills, known only to them, must have inspired fear and awe among those who interacted with them. Now, that's Egyptian priests and priests in the ancient world. Yeah, Tamar?
Is she saying that this is like the Khartoumim, or is she just saying this?
Yeah, this is the Khartoumim. Yeah, that's the pasuk of the Khartoumim. Okay, so these are the priests in the ancient world. Now, if I ask you to compare and contrast these Egyptian priests with priests in Judaism, how would you compare and contrast them? Yeah, Tamar?
Kohanim are like teachers, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so not only that, okay, but zero of what is described here has anything to do with our Kohanim. Okay, our Kohanim are not magic workers. They're not miracle workers. They don't cast curses. They don't help the king solve problems by interacting with the supernatural world. Okay, they don't have secrets. Okay, what is their role? Their role is, as it says in Vayikra 10:8-11. Okay, in Parsha Shemini. So Hashem spoke to Aaron saying, do not drink intoxicating wine, you and your sons with you, when you come to the tent of meeting, that you do not die. This is an eternal decree for your generations. Then he states what the purpose of the Kohanim is. Ulahavdil bein hakodesh uvein hachol, in order to distinguish between the sacred and the profane, uvein hatame uvein hatahor, and between the impure and the pure, ulahoros es bnei Israel, and to teach bnei Israel es kol hachukim asher diber Hashem biad Moshe, aleim biad Moshe, but to teach them all the decrees that Hashem spoke to them through Moshe. Our Kohanim facilitate the avoda in the mikdash, which is not a mystical avoda. They paskin shilas, okay, in terms of tsaras and tuma and tahara, and they are, we prize them for the Sanhedrin, and they teach Bnei Israel. They're the teachers. Nothing to do with magic, and not only that, but in this very parsha, when it says don't drink wine and intoxicating beverages, Rav Hirsch says, just as an aside almost, he says that the discussion here then is not of full-fledged drunkenness, but of reasonable grounds for suspecting the clouding of mental clarity. Hence, he who drinks yain and sheikhar is forbidden to serve in the mikdash, to make legal decisions regarding the mikdash, or to decide any practical halakha question. For what is required for the practice of God's commandments is not hazy and excited emotion and imagination, but a clear mind and a sharp and sober intellect. The symbols of the sanctuary speak not only to the imagination, but to the clear and lucid mind. For only the mind, which comprehends clearly, reaches accurate conclusions and places every detail in its proper category, is capable of guiding us to carry out God's commandments. So that's like their models of mental clarity, to the point where they don't drink anything that screws with their mind. And it's usher for them to do their Kohanic duties when they are intoxicated to any extent. And that is the type of our priests teach clarity and exemplify clarity, and are all about the mind. The ancient priests of the ancient world were about the realm of irrationality and supernatural world and non-knowledge. So it's like night and day. So I think that the message of the Shir is very much in line with like what our Kohanim are trying to promote. Yeah, Esti?
When I first found out that the priests of other nations were called Kohanim, I don't remember how old it was, I thought it was a homonym. I just didn't understand that it was the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I was actually thinking today, like, can you imagine if you were a ger in the ancient world who was used to having all those other priests, and then you came and you're like, okay, let me see the priests. I have like a bad omen that I want interpreted. You would just be so sorely let down. Like here, sit down, we'll learn Bava Kama. Like it's not at all related. Yeah. So the upshot of all this is, again, just to reiterate here, I agree with the claims made that sleight of hand is usher, but I'm qualifying it by saying sleight of hand is usher when done in a manner that promotes belief in the impossible as possible. The Rambam and Sefer Chinuch warn us of the harm in such attending magic shows, while not technically prohibited, can lead to philosophical mistakes and kares. Yes, in the ancient world, not so much now. And I'd say that the real advice would be to take your kid to magic shows, explain to them that this isn't real, show them how tricks work, encourage their chachma analysis of trying to figure out how the magician does it, and that is going to make them, to inoculate them against the harm that the Rambam is trying to suggest. Yeah, Esty?
I just want to say also, I think this is a lifelong quest for everybody. I mean, children are in the process of figuring out what's real and not real for years. It's a long part of childhood, and then your mind starts to work better as come bar mitzvah, teenagerhood into adulthood. But it's something we all are constantly working on, is trying to understand what's real, what's not real, how causality works, and how it doesn't. And it's something it's part of the same thing. It doesn't have to be different.
Exactly right. Okay, and there's only one way to end the shiur, which is by saying good Shabbos. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Have a good Shabbos, everyone. All right. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Have a good Shabbos.
Yeah.